The village of Valianu had long learned to fear the autumn moons. When the harvest ended and the first frost settled over the Carpathian peaks, the elders would gather in the stone church and speak in hushed voices about the ancient debt that bound their people to the castle on the mountain. For generations the agreement had held, a covenant written in blood and sealed with the promise of protection. The Count would spare the village from his hunger, and in return, once every 100 years, a bride would be sent to the castle, never to return. Elena Vasile had grown up hearing the stories, tales whispered by her grandmother, as the old woman stitched by candlelight, her fingers gnarled with age. The chosen bride would be taken at midnight, dressed in white like a corpse prepared for burial, and led up the mountain path by silent servants whose eyes held no light. Some said the brides were drained of blood within hours. Others claimed they became vampires themselves, cursed to walk the earth as undead things forever separated from God's grace. No one knew the truth, because no bride had ever returned. This autumn, the 100th year had come again. Elena stood at the window of the small cottage she shared with her younger sister Irina, watching the village square below. Men had gathered there since dawn, their voices carrying on the cold wind as they argued about which family would bear the burden this time. The selection was to be made by lots, slips of parchment drawn from a wooden box blessed by Father Mihail. Every unmarried woman between the ages of 16 and 25 was to be included. Elena was 22. Irina had just turned 17. The thought of her sister's name being drawn made Elena's stomach twist with fear so profound it felt like sickness. Irina was gentle and innocent, a girl who still believed in the goodness of the world, despite the darkness that surrounded them. She spent her days tending the small garden behind their cottage and caring for the village children, singing old songs that their mother had taught them before the fever took her 3 winters past. Irina's faith was pure and unshaken. She prayed every morning and evening, her voice soft as she knelt before the wooden cross their father had carved, before he died in the mines. Elena had lost her faith long ago. She had watched her parents waste away, had seen good people suffer while the wicked prospered, had felt the weight of a world that seemed to care nothing for innocence or virtue. If God existed, he had turned his face from Valianu. The only power that mattered here was the one that dwelled in the castle, ancient and merciless, sustained by blood and darkness. The church bells began to toll at noon, each stroke heavy as a funeral drum. Elena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and turned from the window. Irina sat at the table, her hands folded in prayer, her dark hair falling in waves around her pale face. She looked so young, so fragile. The thought of those delicate hands being touched by something unholy made Elena's chest tighten with protective fury. "They are calling us," Elena said quietly. "We must go." Irina opened her eyes, and Elena saw the fear there, carefully hidden beneath a mask of composure. Her sister had always been braver than people knew. She stood and smoothed her worn dress, then reached for Elena's hand. Together, Elena whispered. Irina squeezed her fingers and nodded. The square was crowded with villagers, their faces drawn and pale. Every family with an eligible daughter had gathered, mothers clutching their children, fathers standing with rigid shoulders and clenched fists. Father Mihail stood on the church steps, the wooden box held before him like an offering. His face was gaunt, his eyes shadowed with the weight of what he was about to do. Behind him the church doors stood open, revealing the darkness within. Elena and Irina joined the other young women who had formed a line before the priest. There were 12 of them in total. Some wept openly. Others stared straight ahead with blank expressions, as if they had already left their bodies in anticipation of what might come. Elena recognized most of them: Maria, the blacksmith's daughter; Anna, who had been promised in marriage to the miller's son; Lucia, whose mother had died giving birth to her and who had been raised by her grandmother. Each of them was someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone's beloved. Father Mihail raised his hands and the crowd fell silent. He began to pray in Latin, his voice shaking. Elena did not close her eyes. She watched the box, watched the priest's trembling fingers as he reached inside and drew out a single slip of parchment. The paper seemed to glow white in the grey afternoon light. He unfolded it slowly, and Elena saw his face go even paler. His lips moved, forming a name, but no sound came out at first. He tried again, his voice barely a whisper. Irina Vasile. The world tilted. Elena felt the ground shift beneath her feet, felt the blood drain from her face. Beside her, Irina made a small sound, like a wounded animal. The crowd began to murmur. A wave of relief from some families, gasps of horror from others. Elena turned and saw her sister's face, saw the terror there, the absolute knowledge of what awaited her. No, Elena heard herself say. The word came out stronger than she expected. No. She stepped forward, pushing past the other women. Father Mihail looked at her with exhausted eyes. Elena, he began, but she cut him off. Take me instead. The murmuring stopped. The entire village seemed to hold its breath. Father Mihail shook his head slowly. The lots have been drawn. It is God's will. God's will, Elena repeated, and she heard the bitterness in her own voice. Is it God's will that an innocent child be sacrificed to a monster? Is it God's will that we feed our daughters to the darkness? The priest flinched as if she had struck him. Elena, please, we cannot change what has been decided. Then I will change it, Elena said. She turned to face the crowd, her voice rising. I offer myself in my sister's place. Let the covenant be fulfilled with my blood instead of hers. A woman in the crowd began to cry. Elena's neighbor, old Mrs. Popescu, crossed herself and looked away. Irina grabbed Elena's arm, her fingers digging in desperately. No, Elena, you cannot. I will go. It is my name that was chosen. Elena turned to her sister and took her face in her hands. You have your whole life ahead of you, she said softly. You will marry, have children, grow old in the sunlight. Let me do this for you. Tears streamed down Irina's face. I cannot let you die for me. Then live for me, Elena whispered. Live the life I would have wanted. Be happy. That is all I ask. Father Mihail's voice cut through the moment. The covenant specifies a bride, not a volunteer. The one chosen by the lots must go. Elena rounded on him, her fear transforming into rage. Then draw again. Put only my name in the box. Let fate decide if it must, but do not send my sister to that castle. The priest looked helplessly at the village elders who stood nearby. They conferred in low voices, glancing between Elena and Irina, their faces grave. Finally, the eldest among them, a man named George, whose own daughter had been taken a century before, stepped forward. The covenant does not specify how the bride must be chosen, only that a bride must be given. If Elena Vasile offers herself willingly, and if her sister releases her claim, then perhaps the substitution can be made. Irina shook her head violently. I do not release her, I will not. Elena gripped her sister's shoulders. Listen to me. You are good, Irina. You are pure. The world needs people like you. I have nothing to offer but this one act. Let me give my life meaning. Let me save you. For a long moment, Irina stared at her, searching her face. Then, slowly, the resistance went out of her body. She sagged against Elena, sobbing, her whole frame shaking. Elena held her tightly, memorizing the feeling of her sister in her arms, the smell of lavender from the soap they made together, the warmth of living flesh. Father Mihail spoke again, his voice heavy with resignation. Then it is decided. Elena Vasile will be the bride. She will be prepared and delivered to the castle at midnight, as the covenant demands. The crowd began to disperse, families hurrying away as if afraid that the arrangement might be reversed. Elena stood in the square with Irina still clinging to her, feeling strangely calm now that the decision was made. She had bought her sister's life with her own. It was the only thing of value she possessed, and she had given it freely. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the village, Elena looked up at the mountain. The castle was barely visible through the evening mist, a dark silhouette against the darkening sky. Somewhere in those ancient stones, Count Dracula waited. She wondered if he knew yet that his bride had been chosen. She wondered if he cared which woman was brought to him, or if they were all the same to him. Warm bodies to be drained and discarded. She thought of the stories her grandmother had told. The Count had once been a man, a warrior prince who had defended these lands against invaders. He had been noble and brave, a leader his people had loved. But something had happened, something that had transformed him into the creature he was now. Some said he had made a pact with dark forces to gain immortality. Others claimed he had been cursed by a witch, whose advances he had spurned. The truth, like so many things, had been lost to time. What remained was the monster, the thing that sustained itself on blood and lived in eternal night. The thing that demanded tribute and inspired terror. Elena had no illusions about what awaited her. She would be killed or worse, transformed into something like him. Either way, Elena Vasile as she existed now would cease to be, but Irina would live. That was what mattered. As darkness fell, the village women came to prepare her. They bathed her in water infused with rosemary and thyme, dressed her in a white gown that had been worn by brides before her, each one now dead or damned. They braided her long dark hair and placed a wreath of winter roses on her head. They moved in silence, their faces solemn, treating her like a corpse already. Elena submitted to it all without protest, watching their hands as if from a great distance. Irina stayed by her side through everything, holding her hand, her face streaked with tears. Elena wanted to tell her again that it would be all right, but she could not form the lie. Instead, she simply held her sister close, trying to give comfort where there was none to be found. When the church bells struck midnight, the knock came at the door. Elena rose and walked to it before anyone else could move. She opened it to find two figures waiting in the darkness. They wore black cloaks with hoods that hid their faces, but Elena could see enough to know they were not human. Their skin was too pale, their movements too fluid. Servants of the Count, bound to him by blood and dark magic. "It is time," one of them said. The voice was hollow, empty of emotion. Elena nodded. She turned back to Irina one last time. Her sister rushed forward and threw her arms around her, sobbing into her shoulder. Elena held her, feeling her own eyes burn with tears she refused to shed. "Be strong," she whispered. "Live well. Forgive me." Before Irina could respond, Elena pulled away and stepped out into the night. The servants moved to flank her, and together they began walking toward the mountain path. Elena did not look back. If she did, she knew her resolve would break. The path was steep and narrow, winding through dense forest where the moonlight barely penetrated. The servants moved swiftly and silently, never once checking to see if Elena followed. She struggled to keep pace, her slippers offering little protection against the rocks and roots. The cold bit through her thin gown, making her shiver uncontrollably. Above her the castle grew larger, a massive structure of dark stone that seemed to absorb the moonlight rather than reflect it. As they climbed higher, Elena became aware of other presences in the forest. Shapes moved between the trees, too large to be wolves, too quick to be bears. She heard breathing that was not her own, saw eyes gleaming in the darkness. The servants paid no attention to any of it, and the creatures kept their distance as if some invisible barrier held them back. After what felt like hours, they reached the castle gates. They stood open, revealing a courtyard beyond. The servants led Elena through, their footsteps echoing on the ancient stones. The air here was different, heavier, thick with the scent of earth and something else, something sweet and rotten that made her stomach turn. They crossed the courtyard and entered the castle proper, through a massive wooden door reinforced with iron. Inside, the darkness was absolute. Elena heard the door close behind her, with a sound like a tomb sealing shut. Then torches flared to life along the walls, revealing a vast entrance hall. The ceiling soared high overhead, disappearing into shadow. Tapestries hung on the walls, their colors faded with age, depicting battles and feasts from centuries past. A grand staircase swept upward, its banister carved with intricate designs that seemed to writhe in the flickering light. The servants gestured for her to follow and led her up the stairs. They passed through corridors lined with portraits, the painted faces watching her with cold eyes. They passed rooms filled with furniture draped in white cloth, like shrouded corpses waiting to rise. They passed windows that looked out onto nothing but darkness, as if the castle existed in a void beyond the world. Finally, they stopped before a set of double doors carved with strange symbols. One of the servants knocked once, a sound that echoed through the empty halls. A voice from within said, "Enter." The doors swung open, and Elena was gently pushed forward. She stumbled into the room, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The doors closed behind her with a soft click, and she was alone. The chamber was enormous, larger than her entire cottage. A fire burned in a hearth big enough to stand in, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Bookshelves lined every surface, filled with volumes bound in leather and metal. A massive desk sat near the fire, covered in papers and strange instruments. And beyond the desk, standing with his back to her, was a figure. He was tall, dressed in black that blended with the shadows. His hair was dark and long, falling past his shoulders. He did not move or speak, simply stood there, utterly still in a way that no living thing could be. Elena's breath came in short gasps. She wanted to run, to scream, to do anything but stand there waiting. But her legs would not obey her. She was frozen, a mouse before a serpent. Finally, after a silence that stretched beyond endurance, the figure spoke. His voice was deep and cultured, with an accent from an older age. "You came willingly." It was not a question, but Elena answered anyway. Her voice shook. "Yes." "Why?" "To save my sister." The figure turned, and Elena saw his face for the first time. She had expected a monster, something twisted and inhuman. What she saw instead shocked her more than any horror could have. He was beautiful. His features were perfectly formed, aristocratic and severe. His eyes were dark, so dark they seemed to hold no light at all, and they were fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel stripped bare. But it was not his beauty that stunned her. It was the sorrow that emanated from him, a grief so profound it seemed to fill the room. Count Dracula looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You should not have come." Before Elena could respond, he turned away again, facing the fire. "Go," he said quietly. "Leave this place while you still can." Elena stared at his back, confusion cutting through her fear. "What do you mean?" "I mean that I release you from the covenant. Return to your village, tell them the debt is paid. But the covenant demands a bride." "The covenant," he said, his voice hard now, "is a chain I forged in madness and despair. I will not take another innocent life to sustain my cursed existence. Go." Elena should have felt relief. She should have turned and fled down the mountain, back to Irina, back to the life she had resigned herself to losing. But something held her there. Something in his voice, in the slump of his shoulders, in the absolute weariness of his words. "What will happen to the village if I leave?" she asked. He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Nothing. I will trouble them no more. The covenant will end tonight, one way or another." Elena heard the finality in his voice, the dark promise beneath the words. She took a step forward. "You mean to destroy yourself?" He did not answer, but she knew she was right. After centuries of existence, the great Count Dracula, the immortal vampire who had terrorized and protected her people in equal measure, had decided to end his life. And somehow, Elena's arrival had been the catalyst. She did not understand why, but she knew with absolute certainty that if she left this room he would walk into the sunrise and let it burn him to ash. The thought should have brought her satisfaction, one less monster in the world. But instead she felt something unexpected, pity. "I offer my life freely," she heard herself say. "If it can give you even one more night of peace, then let my sacrifice have meaning." He turned to face her again, and this time she saw something flicker in those dark eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. He crossed the distance between them in a movement too fast to follow, suddenly standing before her, close enough that she could feel the unnatural cold radiating from his body. He reached out slowly, as if afraid she might bolt, and touched her cheek with fingers like ice. "Why would you do this?" he asked, and his voice was almost gentle. "Why would you offer yourself to damnation?" "Because someone must care," Elena said, meeting his gaze despite her terror. "Someone must choose compassion over fear. Even here, even now, especially now." For the first time in perhaps centuries, Count Dracula smiled. It was a terrible, heartbreaking expression. "Then you are a fool," he said softly. "But perhaps the world needs more fools like you." He stepped back, releasing her. "You may stay if you wish, but know that I will not harm you. You will be a guest here, nothing more. When you wish to leave, you will be free to do so." Elena's legs finally gave out, and she sank to the floor, her whole body trembling with delayed shock. The Count watched her for a moment, then moved to the door and called for his servants. "Take her to the east wing," he commanded. "See that she has everything she needs." As the silent servants helped her to her feet and led her from the room, Elena looked back one last time. Count Dracula stood by the fire, his face turned toward the flames, a figure of absolute solitude. And in that moment she understood something that would change everything. He was not a monster who had lost his humanity. He was a man drowning in the memory of it. Elena woke to find herself in a bed so soft it felt like floating on clouds. For a moment she forgot where she was, her mind still caught in the fog of exhausted sleep. Then memory crashed back, and she sat up with a gasp, her heart racing. The castle, Count Dracula, the choice she had made. Pale morning light filtered through heavy curtains, creating slashes of gold across the room. Elena looked around, taking in her surroundings with wonder and unease. The chamber was enormous, easily 5 times the size of the room she had shared with Elena. The bed was a massive 4-poster affair draped in crimson velvet. Tapestries covered the walls, depicting pastoral scenes that seemed jarringly cheerful in this place of darkness. A wardrobe stood against one wall, intricately carved with roses and vines. A writing desk sat near the window, and beside it a bookshelf filled with leather-bound volumes. It was beautiful. It was also a cage, however gilded. Elena rose from the bed and discovered she was wearing a nightgown of fine white linen, far softer than anything she had ever owned. Someone had undressed her while she slept and put her in this. The thought made her skin crawl, but she pushed the feeling aside. The servants here were not human. They operated by different rules, governed by needs she could not begin to understand. She moved to the window and pulled back the curtains. The view stole her breath. The castle was perched on the mountainside, looking out over a vast expanse of forest that stretched to the horizon. In the distance, she could see her village, a tiny cluster of buildings nestled in the valley. Smoke rose from chimneys. People would be waking now, beginning their daily routines. Elena would be lighting the fire in their cottage, her face still swollen from crying. The thought made Elena's chest ache. A soft knock at the door made her turn. "Come in," she called, her voice uncertain. The door opened to reveal one of the hooded servants from the night before. It carried a tray laden with food, bread, cheese, fruit, a pot of tea that steamed gently in the cold air. The servant set the tray on a small table near the fire, which Elena now noticed had been lit while she slept. It bowed slightly and moved toward the door. "Wait," Elena said. The servant paused but did not turn. "What is your name?" There was a long silence. Then, in that same hollow voice, it said, "We have no names. We are echoes of what we were, bound to the Master's will until he releases us, or we crumble to dust." Horror washed over Elena. These were not mere servants. They were people who had been transformed into something less than human, their identities stripped away, their wills subsumed. "How long have you served him?" she asked quietly. The servant's shoulders moved in what might have been a shrug. "Time has no meaning here. Decades, centuries, it no longer matters. Is there no way to free you? Only the Master's death or his command can break the bond, and he will do neither." "Why not?" The servant finally turned, and though its face remained hidden in shadow, Elena felt its gaze. "Because he believes we are safer here than in the world beyond. Perhaps he is right. We do not hunger. We do not age. We do not feel pain or sorrow or loss. We simply exist. But you do not live." "No," the servant agreed. "We do not live." It bowed again and left, closing the door softly behind it. Elena stood alone in the beautiful room, feeling the weight of the castle pressing down on her. She had thought the Count a simple monster, a creature of pure evil. But what she was discovering was far more complex and far more terrible. He was a being who had existed so long that he had watched countless lives begin and end, who had accumulated so much guilt that he surrounded himself with the hollow shells of those he could not save, keeping them in this limbo as if that was somehow better than letting them go. She ate the breakfast mechanically, tasting nothing. Afterward, she explored the wardrobe and found it filled with dresses in various styles, some from centuries past, others more recent. All were in dark colors, blacks and deep reds and midnight blues. All were sized perfectly for her. The Count, or his servants, had prepared for her arrival with meticulous care. She dressed in the simplest gown she could find, a dark grey dress with long sleeves and a high collar. It fit as if it had been made for her body. When she looked at herself in the mirror that hung on the wall, she barely recognized the woman staring back. She looked like she belonged here, in this castle of shadows and sorrow. Elena spent the morning exploring. No one stopped her. No doors were locked. She wandered through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced nobles, through rooms filled with treasures that would have fed her village for years, through a library so vast it made her dizzy to contemplate. Books in languages she could not read, scrolls that crumbled at the edges, maps of lands that might not exist anymore. The accumulated knowledge of centuries, all gathering dust in the silence. She found a music room where a harpsichord sat beneath a white sheet. When she pulled the sheet away, dust motes danced in the light. She touched a key experimentally, and the note rang out, pure and clear, startling in its beauty. She wondered when this instrument had last been played, when music had last filled these halls. In the afternoon, she discovered a chapel. It was small and tucked away in a corner of the castle, easy to overlook. The door creaked when she opened it, and the air inside smelled of decay and old incense. Rows of wooden pews faced an altar, where a cross had been turned upside down. The sight made Elena's stomach turn. She moved forward slowly and reached out to right the cross, but the moment her fingers touched the metal, she jerked back with a cry. It was freezing cold, so cold it burned. I would not touch that if I were you. Elena spun around to find Count Dracula standing in the doorway. In the daylight filtering through the chapel's narrow windows, he looked even more unreal. His skin was too pale, too perfect, like carved marble. His eyes remained dark, unreadable. He wore black as he had the night before, but now she could see the quality of the fabric, the old-fashioned cut of his clothes. He was dressed like a prince from a forgotten age. "Why is the cross inverted?" Elena asked, finding her voice. "Because I cannot bear to look upon it the right way up," he replied simply. "It is a reminder of everything I have lost, everything I can never reclaim. You speak as if you had faith once." "I did." He moved into the chapel, his footsteps silent on the stone floor. "I was a defender of Christendom. I fought against the infidel. I believed that God watched over the righteous and punished the wicked." He laughed, a bitter sound. "I was a fool. What happened to you?" He was silent for a long time, standing before the inverted cross with his hands clasped behind his back. Then he said, "I died. I died defending this land, run through with a Turkish blade, my blood soaking into the earth I had sworn to protect. And as I lay there feeling my life drain away, I raged against the injustice of it. I had been faithful, I had been true, and God let me die, like a dog in the dirt." Elena waited, knowing there was more. "A woman came to me as I died, beautiful beyond description, with eyes like amber and a smile that promised eternity. She offered me a choice: die and face whatever judgment awaited, or live forever with the power to protect my people for all time. In my pride and my fury I accepted." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "I did not know the price. What was the price? My humanity, my soul, my ability to walk in the light of day or feel the comfort of faith. I became a creature sustained by the blood of the innocent, capable of terrible things, bound to darkness for eternity. And the woman who made me this way vanished, leaving me to discover the full horror of what I had become." Elena felt something crack inside her chest. "Where is she now?" "Dead," he said flatly. "I hunted her for decades and finally destroyed her. But it changed nothing. The curse remained. I remain. Can it be undone?" He turned to look at her, and she saw the answer in his eyes before he spoke. "No. I have searched for centuries. I have consulted with scholars and sorcerers, priests and demons. There is no cure for what I am. The only release is death, true death, and I am too much a coward to embrace it." "You are not a coward," Elena heard herself say. "You let me go last night. You could have taken my blood, my life, and you chose not to. That is not the act of a coward." He moved toward her with that inhuman speed, stopping just inches away. She forced herself not to flinch, meeting his dark gaze steadily. "You do not know what you are saying," he told her. You do not know what I have done, the lives I have taken, the innocence I have destroyed. I have committed atrocities that would make you flee screaming into the night." "Then tell me," Elena challenged. "Tell me the worst of it. Let me judge for myself what you are." For a long moment he simply stared at her. Then he said, "Come with me." He led her deeper into the castle, down staircases that spiraled into darkness, through corridors that grew colder with each step. Elena's breath misted in the air. The torches on the walls burned with a strange greenish flame that cast sickly light on the stones. Finally, they reached a heavy iron door set into the wall. Count Dracula placed his hand upon it, and Elena heard a series of locks clicking open, mechanisms that no key could operate. The door swung wide, revealing a chamber beyond. Elena stepped through, and immediately wished she had not. The room was filled with coffins, dozens of them, arranged in neat rows, some ornate and some simple, some ancient and some recent. The air was thick with the scent of earth and preservation, and in each coffin, visible through partially open lids, Elena could see bodies, women, all of them, dressed in white like brides. Some looked as if they were merely sleeping, their skin still supple, their faces peaceful. Others had decayed, reduced to skulls and bones and rotted fabric. "These are my sins," Count Dracula said quietly. "Every woman who has been brought to this castle over the centuries, I tried to save them. I tried to offer them freedom, as I offered it to you. But most were too afraid to leave, or they left and met worse fates in the world beyond. Some begged me to transform them, to make them like me, and in moments of weakness I did. But the transformation is agony, and most do not survive it. Those who do become monsters worse than I am, consumed by hunger with none of the control I have learned. I was forced to destroy them." He moved among the coffins, his hand trailing along the lids. "I keep them here as a reminder. Every face, every name, every life cut short because of the covenant I made in desperation and pride. They haunt me in ways the living cannot understand." Elena felt tears on her cheeks. She looked at the women, these brides who had come before her, and saw her own fate reflected back. But she also saw something else, the care with which they had been laid to rest, the flowers long dried that had been placed in their hands, the prayers carved into the stone walls in languages both old and new. This was not the work of a monster who felt nothing. This was a shrine built by someone drowning in guilt. "You mourn them," she said. "Every day," he replied. "Every night, for all eternity, it seems." Elena moved to stand beside him. "Then let me help you bear it." He looked at her sharply. "What? You are alone with this grief. You have carried it for centuries with no one to share the burden. But I am here now. Let me help you remember them properly. Let me honor them as they deserve to be honored. Why would you do this?" His voice was raw. "Why would you stay in this place of death and offer comfort to a monster?" "Because I do not think you are a monster," Elena said. "I think you are a man who made a terrible mistake and has been paying for it ever since. I think you are drowning in guilt and sorrow, and no one should have to drown alone." He stared at her for so long that she began to wonder if she had made a fatal error. Then, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. His touch was cold, but not painful. Gentle, almost reverent. "You are extraordinary," he whispered, "and that terrifies me." "Why?" "Because I know how this ends. I will grow attached to you. I will come to need your presence, your warmth, the sound of your voice in these empty halls. And then you will age and die, as all mortals do, and I will be left with another coffin to add to this collection, another ghost to haunt me." "Then do not grow attached," Elena said, though her heart was pounding. "Keep your distance. Let me be here. But do not let yourself care." His laugh was hollow. "It is already too late for that." He released her hand and turned away, moving back toward the door. "Come. This place is too full of sorrow. Let us return to the light, such as it is." They climbed back through the castle in silence. When they reached the main floor, Count Dracula paused. "You are free to go wherever you wish within these walls. The servants will provide anything you need. I will not trouble you with my presence more than necessary." "Wait," Elena called as he began to walk away. "Will I see you again?" He stopped but did not turn. "Yes. When night falls, I will come to you." There are things you should know about this place, about the dangers that surround us. If you are to stay here, you must be prepared. Prepared for what? For the others, he said quietly. I am not the only creature of darkness in these mountains, and they will know you are here. They will come for you, drawn by your warmth, your life, your blood. I can protect you, but only if you understand what you face. Then teach me, Elena said. I am not afraid. He finally turned and she saw something flicker across his face, an emotion she could not name. You should be, he said. Fear keeps mortals alive in places like this. Do not abandon it entirely. Then he was gone, moving with that impossible speed, leaving Elena alone in the corridor. She stood there for a long moment, her mind reeling from everything she had seen and learned. The chapel with its inverted cross, the crypt with its dozens of coffins, the Count's confession of his crimes and his unending guilt. She should be terrified. She should be fleeing down the mountain, back to the safety of the village, away from this cursed place. But instead, she felt something else entirely. A sense of purpose, a conviction that she had been brought here for a reason beyond simple sacrifice. Count Dracula had existed for centuries in isolation, surrounded by death and darkness, with no one to offer him comfort or understanding. He had become so lost in his guilt that he could no longer see a path forward, but Elena could see it. She could see the man he had been, the goodness that still flickered within him despite everything he had become. If she could reach that goodness, if she could fan that small flame into something brighter, perhaps there was hope. Not for salvation, perhaps that was beyond reach, but for peace, for a moment of grace in the midst of damnation. She would stay, not because she was bound by the covenant, but because she chose to. She would stay, and she would help him remember what it meant to be human, even if he could never be human again. She would stay, and she would honor the women who had come before her, giving them the dignity in death that they had been denied in life. And if, in doing so, she brought some small measure of light to this place of darkness, then perhaps her sacrifice would have meaning after all. Elena returned to her room and spent the rest of the afternoon reading. She had taken a book from the library, a collection of poetry in a language she could barely understand, but the verses spoke to something deep within her. Love and loss, beauty and decay, the eternal struggle between light and shadow. It seemed fitting for this place. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and gold, Elena moved to the window and watched the darkness rise. Somewhere in the castle, she knew Count Dracula was stirring, coming fully alive as night claimed the world. She wondered what he thought about during the daylight hours when his power was weakest. Did he dream? Did he remember his mortal life? Did he think of her? A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. She opened it to find one of the servants holding another tray. Dinner, it said simply. Elena accepted the tray and set it on the table. Before the servant could leave, she asked, "Does he eat?" "The master?" "No. He has not consumed mortal food for many centuries. He sustains himself on blood alone." "Does he take it from the servants?" "Sometimes. When the hunger becomes too great to bear, we feel no pain from it. We are beyond pain. And from humans." "Does he hunt?" "He takes blood from animals when he can. When he cannot, he enters a state of deep sleep until the hunger passes. He has not fed from a human in over 50 years. Elena absorbed this information, trying to reconcile it with the image of the monster she had expected to find. 50 years was longer than she had been alive. He had denied himself, starved himself, rather than take a human life. The control that must require, the constant vigilance, the endless battle against his own nature. "Thank you," she said to the servant. The figure bowed and left. Elena ate her dinner slowly, tasting nothing. She was thinking about blood and hunger, and the terrible weight of immortality. She was thinking about a man who was no longer a man, who clung to the remnants of his humanity with desperate strength, who surrounded himself with reminders of his failures as penance. When full darkness had fallen, the knock she had been waiting for came. Elena opened the door to find Count Dracula standing there, his face shadowed. He had changed clothes, now wearing a deep crimson shirt beneath his black coat. The color made his pale skin seem even more unnatural. "May I enter?" he asked formally. Elena stepped aside, and he moved into the room with that fluid grace that reminded her he was not human. He went to the window and looked out at the night, his hands clasped behind his back, the posture of a man used to bearing great burdens. "I have come to warn you," he said without preamble. "There are creatures in these mountains that are not bound by the covenant, wolves that are more than wolves, things that crawl from the earth when the moon is dark, spirits of those who died badly and cannot rest. They are drawn to this castle because I am here, because darkness calls to darkness." "What kind of creatures?" Elena asked. "Vampires, some of them, made by me in my early years, before I learned control, before I understood the horror of what I was creating. They were cast out, banished to the wilderness, but they remain. They hunger always, and they are cunning." He turned to face her. "If you leave the castle, they will come for you. If you venture into certain parts of the grounds, they will find you. You must stay within the walls, within the wards I have set." Wards, protections, spells woven into the very stones of this place. They keep out those I do not wish to enter. But the magic is old and growing weaker. I do not know how much longer it will hold. Can you not strengthen the wards?" "I could," he said quietly, "but it would require blood, a sacrifice, and I have made enough sacrifices." Elena understood what he was not saying. The wards could be renewed with his own blood, but he would not do it. Perhaps because he lacked the strength. Perhaps because part of him wanted the wards to fail, wanted the darkness to finally consume him. "I will stay within the castle," Elena promised. "I have no desire to face monsters in the woods." "Wise," he said. Then he hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. "There is something else you should know. The covenant bound me to protect the village in exchange for the brides. But if the covenant is broken, if you are the last, then I am free of that obligation. Free to leave this place, to go where I wish, or free to let the darkness have its way. You would abandon them. The people who have served you tribute for centuries, not abandon, release. They would no longer need to fear me or appease me. They would be free to live their lives without the shadow of this castle hanging over them." "But the other creatures," Elena said, "the things you mentioned, would they not descend on the village once your protection is gone?" "Yes," he admitted, "they would. That is the trap I have built for myself. If I remain, I must continue the covenant, must continue to demand tribute, must continue to add to my collection of dead brides. If I leave or die, the village is destroyed. There is no escape from this curse." Elena sat down heavily, the weight of it all pressing on her. "What do you want me to do?" "I want you to live," he said simply. "I want you to leave this place and return to your sister and grow old in the sunlight. I want you to be the one who escapes." "But I do not want to escape," Elena said, surprising herself with the vehemence of her words. "I want to stay. I want to help you find a way out of this trap. There must be something we can do." He moved toward her, crouching down so they were at eye level. His face was close to hers, close enough that she could see the way his eyes caught the firelight, turning them almost red. "You are brave and foolish in equal measure," he said softly, "and I wish with all that remains of my ruined soul that I could protect you from what is coming." "What is coming?" "The end," he said. "One way or another, this cannot continue. The covenant will break, the wards will fail. And when they do, everything I have held at bay for centuries will come crashing down. I only hope that when it happens you are far away from here." Elena reached out slowly and placed her hand on his cheek. He flinched at the touch, but did not pull away. His skin was cold, but not unpleasant, like marble warmed by winter sun. "I am exactly where I need to be," she told him, "and I am not leaving." For a moment, just a moment, she saw something in his eyes that might have been hope. Then he closed them and pulled away, standing and moving back toward the door. "Sleep well, Elena. Tomorrow I will show you more of the castle, the places that are safe and those that are not. You should know the full measure of what you have chosen." He left before she could respond, the door closing softly behind him. Elena sat alone in the firelight, her hand still tingling from where she had touched his face. She was beginning to understand the depth of his isolation, the unbearable loneliness of an existence that stretched across centuries with no companionship, no warmth, no hope of redemption. But she was also beginning to understand her own power in this situation. She was mortal, temporary, fragile. But in her fragility was strength. She could offer him something he had not known for hundreds of years: human connection, simple kindness, the possibility, however slim, that he was not beyond saving. As she lay in bed that night, staring at the canopy above her, Elena made a silent vow. She would not let Count Dracula walk into the sunrise and burn away to nothing. She would not let him surrender to despair. She would find a way to break the curse, to free him from the covenant, to give him the peace he so desperately craved, even if it cost her everything, even if it cost her life. Because that was what love did, she realized with a start. It sacrificed, it gave without expectation of return. And though she barely knew this tortured creature who called himself a monster, she was beginning to understand that what she felt for him was the beginning of something that could become love, if she let it. Outside, the wind howled around the castle walls. In the distance, wolves answered with their own howls, wild and hungry. And somewhere in the darkness, Count Dracula stood alone, remembering the warmth of a human touch and wondering if he dared to hope again. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm. Elena would wake to find breakfast waiting for her, prepared by the silent servants who moved through the castle like ghosts. She would spend her mornings exploring, discovering new rooms and hidden corners, always careful to stay within the boundaries Count Dracula had marked as safe. The afternoons she devoted to reading in the vast library, losing herself in books written in languages both familiar and foreign, or sitting in the music room where she had begun to teach herself to play the harpsichord, filling the empty halls with hesitant melodies. But it was the evenings she lived for. The evenings when darkness fell and Count Dracula would come to her, sometimes formal and distant, sometimes allowing glimpses of the man he had been centuries ago. They would talk for hours about philosophy and history, about the nature of good and evil, about the weight of choices and the burden of consequence. He was brilliant and tormented in equal measure, his mind sharp as a blade but forever cutting at himself. On the 5th night of her stay, Elena asked him about his mortal life. They were in the library, she seated in a deep chair by the fire. He standing by the window watching the moon rise over the mountains. For a long time he did not answer, and she thought perhaps she had overstepped. Then he began to speak, his voice soft and distant as if the words came from across a great span of time. "I was born in 1431, he said, the third son of a prince, which meant I was destined for the church or the sword. I chose the sword." His lips curved in something that was not quite a smile. "I was ambitious even then. I wanted glory. I wanted my name to be remembered in songs and stories. I wanted to be a hero." "And you were," Elena said. "You defended this land." "I defended it, yes. I fought the Turks who sought to conquer us. I won battles that should have been lost. I held castles against sieges that should have broken us, and I was brutal in ways that made even my own men fear me." He turned to look at her, his eyes dark with memory. "I impaled my enemies and left them to die slowly as warnings to others. I burned villages that had sheltered Turkish soldiers. I did terrible things in the name of righteousness, and I felt no guilt because I believed God was on my side." Elena said nothing, simply waited for him to continue. "When I was 31 years old, I was betrayed by my own brother. He made a pact with the Turks, opened the gates of my fortress, and I was killed in the fighting that followed. As I lay dying, all I could think was how unfair it was. I had given everything to the defense of Christendom, and this was my reward. Death in the dirt, murdered by treachery, my lands falling to the infidel." "That was when she came," Elena said quietly. "Yes." He moved away from the window, pacing now, his movements restless. She appeared like a vision, beautiful beyond description. She told me she had watched me for years, admired my strength and my will. She said I was too valuable to lose, that the world needed men like me. She offered me eternity, and I took it without question, without thinking of the cost. What was her name? He was silent for a moment. Elisabetta. She was ancient, turned sometime in the Roman era, or so she claimed. She had seen empires rise and fall. She collected powerful men, turned them into vampires, used them for her own purposes, I was simply the latest in a long line. You said you destroyed her. I did. His voice went flat, emotionless. It took me 50 years to find her again. She had gone to Constantinople, surrounded herself with other vampires, built a court of darkness. I infiltrated it, earned her trust, and then I drove a stake through her heart while she slept. I watched her crumble to dust, and I felt nothing but emptiness, because it did not change what you had become. No. The curse remained. I returned here, to this castle, and I tried to continue as I had before. I tried to be a protector, to defend my people even in my monstrous state, but I had to feed. The hunger was constant, maddening. I killed innocents, drained them until they were corpses, and I hated myself more with each life I took. Is that when you made the covenant? Years later, after I had slaughtered so many that the villages were emptying, people fleeing rather than face the monster in the castle, the elders came to me and begged for mercy. They offered the covenant, one bride every 100 years in exchange for protection and restraint. I accepted because I was desperate, because I thought perhaps if I only fed rarely, I could maintain some measure of control. And did it work? For a time. But each bride was a new weight on my conscience. Each woman brought here was a reminder of what I had become. Some I killed quickly, trying to make it merciful. Others I tried to save, offering them freedom, but they were too afraid or too broken by what they had seen. A few begged me to transform them, believing that immortality was a gift rather than a curse. Elena remembered the crypt, the rows of coffins. What happened to those you turned? Most died in the transformation. The few who survived lost their humanity almost immediately. They became creatures of pure hunger, unable to think beyond their next meal. I had to destroy them before they could harm others. He stopped pacing and stood very still. The worst part was seeing the moment when they realized what they had become, the horror in their eyes, the desperate plea for me to end them. I obliged, but each time it felt like dying myself. Elena rose from her chair and moved toward him. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the way he held himself as if bracing against physical pain. Without thinking, she reached out and touched his arm. He flinched, but did not pull away. "You carry the weight of centuries," she said softly. "No one should have to bear that alone." "I do not deserve companionship," he replied. "I do not deserve comfort or understanding. I deserve only the isolation I have created for myself. Perhaps. But you have it anyway, whether you deserve it or not." He looked down at her hand on his arm, his expression unreadable. "Why do you not fear me? Why do you not see me as the monster I am?" "Because I see more than the monster," Elena said. "I see the man who mourns every life he has taken. I see the prince who fought for his people, even though the methods were brutal. I see someone who has been punished far beyond what any crime warrants. And I see someone who is desperately trying to find a way back to the light, even though he believes it is impossible." "You see too much," he whispered. "You see things that are no longer there. Then prove me wrong. Show me the monster you claim to be." He moved with that terrible speed, suddenly pressing her back against the bookshelf, his hands on either side of her head, caging her in. His face was inches from hers, his eyes burning with something between rage and anguish. "This is what I am," he said, his voice rough. "A predator, a killer. When I look at you, I see the pulse in your throat, hear the blood rushing through your veins, smell the warmth of your life. Part of me wants to tear into you, drain you until there is nothing left, satisfy the hunger that never truly leaves." Elena's heart was pounding, but not entirely with fear. There was something else there, something she was afraid to name. "Then why do you not?" "Because the other part of me, the part that still remembers being human, cannot bear the thought of harming you." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "You have shown me more kindness in a few days than I have known in centuries. You have looked at me without disgust, spoken to me without fear. You have made me remember what it felt like to be a man instead of a monster. And I would rather walk into the sunrise and burn than destroy that." Elena raised her hand slowly and placed it on his chest, over where his heart would have once beaten. "Then let me stay," she said. "Let me continue to remind you of your humanity. You are not beyond saving, no matter what you believe. For a long moment they stood there, frozen in that strange intimacy. Then Count Dracula pulled back, releasing her and moving away. His hands were shaking, she noticed. She had made the ancient vampire's hands shake with nothing but her words and her touch. "You should rest," he said, his voice strained. "It is late, and you need sleep. Will you come tomorrow night?" He paused at the door, his back to her. "Yes, if you wish it." "I do." He nodded once and left. Elena stood alone in the library, her hand still tingling where she had touched him. Something was growing between them, something neither of them had asked for or expected. A connection that transcended the boundaries of mortal and immortal, predator and prey. She was falling into something deep and dangerous, and she could not bring herself to care. The next evening, Count Dracula took her to a part of the castle she had not yet seen. They descended a different set of stairs, these leading not to the crypt but to a vast underground chamber. When he lit the torches, Elena gasped. The room was a treasury, not of gold or jewels, though there was some of that, but of memories. Armor stood on racks, ancient and battle-worn. Weapons hung on the walls, swords and spears and axes from different eras. Banners bearing coats of arms long forgotten draped from the ceiling. And in the center of it all, a throne, simple and carved from dark wood. "This was my father's hall," Count Dracula said quietly. When the castle was still a home instead of a prison, he moved among the artifacts, his fingers trailing over them with something like reverence. "I keep these things as reminders of what was lost, a time when I was mortal, when my concerns were mortal, when death was an ending rather than an impossibility." Elena walked slowly through the chamber, examining each piece. She stopped before a portrait hanging on the wall, partially obscured by shadow. When she moved a torch closer, she saw it depicted a young man, perhaps 30, with dark hair and intense eyes. He was dressed in the armor of a warrior prince, a sword at his side, a crown on his head. The resemblance to Count Dracula was unmistakable, but there was something different about this man's face, a warmth, a vitality that the vampire no longer possessed. "Is this you?" she asked. "As I was," he confirmed. "Painted shortly before my death. I was at the height of my power then, feared and respected in equal measure. I thought I was invincible. You were handsome. I was human," he said, as if that explained everything. Perhaps it did. Elena continued her exploration and found a smaller section of the chamber that made her breath catch. It was a shrine of sorts, dedicated to a woman. A portrait showed a beautiful lady with fair hair and gentle eyes, dressed in the fashion of the 15th century. Beside it lay a wedding veil, yellowed with age, and a simple gold ring. "Who was she?" Elena asked, though part of her already knew. "My wife." Count Dracula's voice was barely audible. "Margareta. We were married for 3 years before I was killed. She was carrying our child when I died." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. What happened to her? "She remarried to my brother, the one who betrayed me. It was a political arrangement, meant to secure the succession. She died in childbirth a year later, both she and the babe." He stood beside Elena, staring at the portrait. "I watched her funeral from the shadows, unable to approach, unable to comfort her family. I was already a monster by then, and she was being laid to rest as a saint. The separation was complete. Did you love her?" "Yes. And she loved me despite my flaws, despite my brutality. She was the one gentle thing in my violent life. Losing her, even before I became this, was agony. Knowing that she died believing I had abandoned her to my brother, that was worse than any physical pain." Elena reached out and took his hand. His fingers were cold, but they closed around hers with surprising gentleness. "I am sorry," she whispered, "for all of it. Do not be sorry for me. Save your compassion for those who deserve it." "Everyone deserves compassion," Elena said firmly, "even monsters. Especially monsters, perhaps, because they have forgotten how to give it to themselves." He turned to look at her, and in the torchlight his face was a study in sorrow. "You are going to break my heart," he said softly. "What little remains of it." "Then let it break," Elena replied. "Let it break, and maybe something new can grow from the pieces." Before he could respond, A sound echoed through the castle. A howl, long and mournful, coming from somewhere outside the walls. Count Dracula's expression changed instantly, becoming sharp and alert. "Get behind me," he commanded. "What is it?" "They are coming. The creatures I warned you about. They have sensed your presence, and they are testing the wards." More howls joined the first, a chorus of inhuman voices that made Elena's skin crawl. Count Dracula moved to the stairs, gesturing for her to follow. They climbed quickly, emerging into the main hall just as the servants appeared, moving with unusual agitation. "The wards are weakening," one of them reported in that hollow voice. "The east wall has already been breached." "Seal the doors," Count Dracula ordered. "Do not let anything enter the castle proper." He turned to Elena. "Come. You will be safer in your room." "What are you going to do?" "What I have always done. Protect what is mine." He led her swiftly through the corridors, the howls growing louder, closer. Elena could hear scratching now, claws against stone, and underneath it all, a sound like laughter, high and mad. When they reached her room, Count Dracula pushed her inside. "Bar the door behind me," he said. "Do not open it for anyone except me. Do not even open it if you hear servants calling. The creatures can mimic voices. You are going to fight them. I am going to drive them back, yes. It is not the first time they have tried to breach the castle, and it will not be the last. But I will not let them have you." "Be careful," Elena said, surprising herself with the intensity of her concern. Something flickered in his eyes. "I am difficult to kill," he said, attempting levity, "but I appreciate the sentiment." Then he was gone, moving with that inhuman speed. Elena barred the door as instructed and moved to the window. Below, in the courtyard, she could see shapes moving in the darkness. They were not quite wolves and not quite human, something in between, hunched and wrong. There were dozens of them, circling the castle, looking for weaknesses in the wards. Then Count Dracula appeared, stepping out into the courtyard as if he had no fear at all. The creatures turned toward him as one, and Elena heard their growls, hungry and hateful. But they did not attack. They circled him warily, and Elena realized they feared him even as they desired to challenge him. He spoke, his voice carrying clearly in the night air, though Elena could not make out the words. Whatever he said made the creatures agitated. They snarled and snapped, but still they did not advance. Then one, larger than the others, separated from the pack and stood before him. It spoke, its voice a guttural approximation of human speech. "This one is ours," it said. "You have kept us starving in the wilderness while you feast in your castle. Give us the woman and we will leave." "No," Count Dracula said simply. The creature laughed, a terrible sound. "You grow weak, old one. Your power fades. Soon the wards will fail completely, and then we will take everything. The castle, the woman, your very existence. You cannot hold against us forever. Perhaps not. But I can hold tonight, and tomorrow night, and every night until the sun rises and you must flee back to your holes. I have eternity, and I have patience. You have only hunger and desperation." The creature snarled and lunged. Count Dracula moved faster than Elena's eyes could follow, his hand closing around the creature's throat. He lifted it off the ground as if it weighed nothing, and Elena saw his other hand transform, fingers becoming claws dark and sharp as obsidian. With a single movement, he tore the creature's throat out. It made a wet, choking sound, and then dissolved into ash that scattered on the wind. The other creatures howled in rage and charged. Count Dracula met them with terrible violence. He moved through them like death itself, tearing and breaking, his movements a blur of speed and precision. Elena watched in horrified fascination as he destroyed creature after creature, their bodies turning to ash and bone, until finally the survivors broke and fled, howling their retreat into the forest. Count Dracula stood alone in the courtyard, covered in blood that was not his own, his chest heaving though he did not need to breathe. Slowly, the inhuman aspects faded. His claws became hands again. His eyes, which had burned red in the fight, returned to their usual dark color. He looked up at Elena's window, and even from this distance she could see the question in his gaze. She did not flinch. She did not look away. She met his eyes and nodded once, a gesture of acceptance. She had seen him as a monster, seen the violence he was capable of, and she was not afraid. She understood now what he had been trying to tell her. He was dangerous, capable of terrible destruction. But he had used that violence to protect her, to drive back creatures that would have torn her apart. Count Dracula held her gaze for a moment longer, then turned and disappeared into the castle. Elena stepped back from the window, her heart pounding. She unbarred the door and waited. Minutes passed. Then she heard his footsteps in the corridor, slow and heavy, and the soft knock. She opened the door to find him standing there, still covered in blood and ash. "I am sorry you had to witness that," he said quietly. "Come in," Elena replied, stepping aside. He hesitated. "I am not fit company at the moment. Come in anyway." He entered, moving to the fire and standing with his back to her. "I told you I was a monster," he said. "Now you have seen the truth of it." "What I saw," Elena said carefully, "was someone protecting what matters to him. What I saw was courage and strength used in defense rather than malice. I killed them without mercy. They would have killed me without mercy, and you know it." He turned to face her, and she saw the anguish in his expression. "This is what my existence is, Elena. Violence and blood and endless nights of holding back the darkness. This is what I can offer you. Nothing more." Elena moved toward him until she stood close enough to touch. "Then that is what I accept," she said simply. "All of it. The violence and the blood and the darkness. Because I also see the loyalty and the protection and the desperate attempt to be better than what you were made to be." "You are a fool," he whispered. "Perhaps. But I am your fool, if you will have me." For a long moment, he simply stared at her. Then slowly, he raised his hand and cupped her cheek, his touch gentle despite the blood that stained his fingers. "I do not deserve you," he said. "I am not asking you to deserve me," Elena replied. "I am asking you to let me stand beside you, to let me help you carry the burden, to let me be the light in your darkness, even if it is only a small light." Something in him broke then. She saw it happen, saw the centuries of isolation and guilt crack apart, allowing something raw and vulnerable to emerge. He pulled her close, resting his forehead against hers, and for the first time since she had met him, he allowed himself to simply hold another being without fear or restraint. They stood like that for a long time, neither speaking, simply existing together in the firelight. Outside the wind howled and the mountains loomed dark and cold, but in this room, in this moment, there was warmth, there was connection. There was the beginning of something that might, against all odds and reason, be called love. When Count Dracula finally pulled away, his expression had changed. The anguish was still there, but beneath it was something Elena had not seen before. Hope, fragile and uncertain, but undeniably present. "Stay with me tonight," he said quietly. "Not as prey, not as tribute, simply as companion. I do not wish to be alone." Elena nodded. "I will stay." He settled into the chair by the fire, and Elena sat at his feet, leaning against his legs. His hand came to rest on her hair, fingers moving gently through the strands. It was intimate and innocent in equal measure, a gesture of trust from a being who had not trusted anyone in centuries. As the night deepened and the fire burned low, Elena felt herself drifting towards sleep. The last thing she was aware of was Count Dracula's voice, soft as a prayer, speaking words in a language she did not know but understood nonetheless. They were words of gratitude, of wonder, of a hope so long denied it had nearly died. And in the darkness of the castle, surrounded by death and memory and the weight of uncounted years, something impossible began to grow. Not redemption, perhaps that would always be out of reach, but something equally precious. The possibility of peace, the chance at a connection that transcended the boundaries of mortality, the fragile, terrifying, beautiful beginning of love. Outside, the creatures regrouped in the forest, licking their wounds and plotting their next assault. The wards continued to weaken, cracks forming in the ancient magic. Time was running out, though neither Elena nor Count Dracula knew how little remained. They had this night, and perhaps a handful more, before everything would change. But for now, in this moment, they had each other. And that, Elena thought as sleep finally claimed her, was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything. Elena woke to find herself in her bed, though she had no memory of being carried there. The fire had been rebuilt, casting warm light across the room, and Count Dracula sat in the chair where she had last seen him, watching her with an expression she could not quite read. The blood and ash from the night before had been washed away, and he looked almost human in the soft morning light that filtered through the curtains. "You stayed," she said, her voice rough with sleep. "I did not wish to leave you unguarded. The creatures are growing bolder. They will return." Elena sat up, pushing her hair back from her face. "How long have you been sitting there?" "Most of the night. I do not sleep as mortals do. Sometimes I enter a state of rest, but true sleep is beyond me now." He paused. "I watched you dream. You smiled once in your sleep. I wondered what you were dreaming of." Elena felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I do not remember. Perhaps it was something pleasant. I hope so. You deserve pleasant dreams even in this place." They were silent for a moment, the intimacy of the previous night hanging between them, unspoken but present. Finally, Elena asked, "What will you do about the wards?" "I will reinforce them as best I can. It will buy us time, though not much. The magic is ancient and tied to the Covenant. Now that the Covenant is broken, the wards are unraveling. Eventually, they will fail completely. How long? Weeks, perhaps. Maybe only days. It depends on how aggressively the creatures test the defenses. Then we must find another way to protect the castle, or to stop the creatures entirely." Count Dracula smiled, but there was no humor in it. "You speak as if there is a solution." "I have been searching for one for centuries, Elena. There is none. The creatures I made cannot be unmade. They exist now, and they will exist until someone destroys them, or they destroy each other." "Then we destroy them," Elena said firmly. "You defeated them last night. Surely if you hunted them systematically, you could eliminate them. I could kill some, perhaps many, but they breed after a fashion. They infect others, create new vampires from the humans they attack. And while I am hunting them, I would leave you unprotected." He shook his head. "No. The only real solution is for you to leave this place and return to safety." "I will not leave you," Elena said. "We have been through this." "Then you will die here," he said flatly. "If not by the creature's claws, then by time. You are mortal, Elena. You age, you sicken, you die. That is the nature of your existence." "Then turn me," Elena said, the words leaving her mouth before she could think them through. "Make me like you." The change in Count Dracula was instantaneous. He was across the room in a heartbeat, gripping her shoulders, his eyes burning with intensity. "Do not say such things. Do not even think them. Why not? If I were like you, I would not age. I would not die. I could stay with you. You would become a monster," he said, his voice shaking. "You would lose everything that makes you who you are. Your warmth, your compassion, your humanity. You would become a creature of hunger and darkness, and I would have to watch as the light died in your eyes. You do not know that. Perhaps I would be different." "No one is different," he said harshly. "I have turned others, Elena. I have watched what happens. The transformation burns away the soul, leaving only appetite and instinct. Even those who begin with the best intentions become twisted versions of themselves. I will not do that to you. I would rather lose you to death than to damnation." He released her and turned away, his hands clenched into fists. "The very thought of taking your blood, of draining you to the edge of death, and then forcing you to drink from me, of watching you writhe in agony as your body dies, and something else takes its place. It sickens me. I have committed many sins, but I will not add that to the list." Elena understood then the depth of his conviction. He was not refusing out of cruelty or indifference. He was refusing because he cared for her too much to damn her to his existence. The realization made her chest ache, with a confusing mixture of frustration and affection. "Then we find another way," she said quietly. "Some way to strengthen the wards without blood. Some way to protect the castle and give us time to think. There is no other way. Then we make one." He looked at her over his shoulder, and despite everything he smiled. You are impossibly stubborn. I learned from the best." That afternoon, Elena convinced Count Dracula to take her to the castle's library and show her the books on magic and wards. They spent hours poring over ancient texts, many written in languages Elena could not read, but which Count Dracula translated in his cultured voice. The magic that protected the castle was complex, woven through centuries by various practitioners, each adding layers to what had come before. The original wards were created by a priest, Count Dracula explained, his finger tracing symbols on a yellowed page. "Father Vasile from your village, actually. He was a good man, learned in the old ways that the church has since forgotten. He came to me shortly after I made the covenant, when I was still struggling to control the hunger. He offered to help protect the villagers from the creatures I had made. What did he do? He blessed the castle, sanctified it in a way that made it anathema to the undead. But because I dwelled here, he had to create exceptions, loopholes in the magic. The wards would keep out those I did not invite, but they would allow me to remain. It was a delicate balance, and the balance is breaking. Yes, the magic was tied to the covenant, to the regular sacrifice that renewed the bond between the castle and the village. Without that renewal, the wards are failing." He closed the book with a soft thud. "Father Vasile warned me this might happen. He said that magic built on sacrifice would only last as long as the sacrifices continued." "Then we need a different kind of sacrifice," Elena said. "Something that renews the bond without requiring a life." Count Dracula looked at her sharply. "What do you mean? The covenant required brides, but what if what it truly needed was not death but connection? What if the magic could be renewed through choice rather than coercion? You are suggesting a new covenant. I am suggesting we change the terms of the old one. The village gave you brides out of fear. What if someone offered themselves out of love?" He stared at her for a long moment. "You, me? Absolutely not. I will not allow you to bind yourself to this place, to me, through magic. Do you understand what that would mean? Your life would be tied to the wards. If they failed, you would die. If the castle fell, you would fall with it." "But the wards would not fail," Elena said. "They would be strengthened by the voluntary nature of the bond." "Is that not how magic works? Intent matters. Freely given sacrifices are more powerful than forced ones." Count Dracula turned away, his jaw tight. "Even if what you say is true, even if such a thing were possible, I would not accept it. I will not trap you here. You are not trapping me. I am choosing to stay. You do not understand what you would be giving up. Your freedom, your life, your future. All of it would be bound to this cursed place." "I have no future outside these walls," Elena said quietly. "If I return to the village, I will spend the rest of my life wondering what happened to you. I will marry some man I do not love, bear children who will grow up in the shadow of this castle and die having never truly lived. Here, with you, I am more alive than I have ever been." He turned to face her, his expression a mask of anguish. "You would condemn yourself to an existence of darkness for my sake. I would choose an existence of meaning over a life of emptiness. And if that existence is dark, then so be it. I will be your light, and you will be my purpose." For a long time he said nothing. Then he moved to the window and looked out at the mountains. "What you propose may not even be possible. The magic of the covenant is ancient and specific. Altering it would require rituals I do not fully understand, components I may not be able to gather. Then we learn, we study, we find a way, and if we fail, then we fail together." He laughed, a sound caught between bitterness and wonder. "You are either the bravest person I have ever met or the most foolish. Cannot I be both?" He turned back to her, and for the first time since she had known him, he allowed himself to truly look at her with unguarded emotion. She saw longing there and fear, and something deeper that made her breath catch. "I do not deserve your devotion," he said softly, "but God help me. I want it. I want you to stay. I want to believe that there is a way forward that does not end in your death or damnation. I want to hope again, even though hope has failed me at every turn." "Then hope with me," Elena said. "Let us try this together." They spent the next several days buried in research. Count Dracula brought book after book from the deepest parts of the library, texts so old they crumbled at the touch, written by monks and sorcerers and scholars long dead. Elena read until her eyes ached, trying to make sense of arcane symbols and complex theories of magical binding. Slowly, piece by piece, they began to understand what would be required. The ritual would need to take place at midnight on the new moon, when the barrier between worlds was thinnest. It would require blood, but not death. Elena would need to offer her blood freely, mixed with herbs and spoken words of power, and the mixture would be used to renew the wards at specific points around the castle. Most importantly, Elena would need to speak vows binding herself to the castle and to Count Dracula, not as bride in the sense the covenant had demanded, but as guardian and companion. "It is dangerous," Count Dracula warned as they finalized their understanding. "If something goes wrong, if the magic rejects the offering or if the wording of the vows is imprecise, you could be killed instantly." "I trust you," Elena said simply. "I trust that you will guide me through it safely." The new moon was 3 nights away. As the time approached, Elena found herself both eager and terrified. She was about to bind herself irrevocably to this place and to the creature who inhabited it. There would be no going back, no changing her mind, no escape if things went wrong. But when she looked at Count Dracula, saw the careful hope beginning to kindle in his eyes, she knew she was making the right choice. On the night before the ritual, Elena went to the village one last time. Count Dracula accompanied her partway down the mountain, stopping where the wards still held strong. "Go to your sister," he said. "Say goodbye properly. Give her whatever peace you can. Will you wait for me? I will wait as long as necessary." Elena made her way down the familiar path, her heart heavy with what she knew she must do. The village looked smaller than she remembered, the cottages huddled together as if for warmth. She found her way to the cottage she had shared with Elena and knocked softly. Elena opened the door, her face pale and drawn. When she saw Elena, she let out a cry and threw her arms around her sister. "I thought you were dead," she sobbed. "I thought I would never see you again." Elena held her tightly, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender. "I am alive," she murmured. "I am well." They went inside, and Elena saw that the cottage looked the same, though dust had begun to gather on the surfaces. Elena had clearly not been keeping house properly, too consumed with grief to care for such things. They sat at the table where they had shared so many meals, and Elena took her sister's hands. "I need to tell you something," Elena began. "I am not returning to the village." Elena's eyes widened with horror. "He is keeping you prisoner." "No." Elena shook her head firmly. "I am staying by choice. I am staying because I have found something there that I never had here. Purpose, connection, love." "Love?" Elena stared at her as if she had gone mad. "Elena, he is a monster. He is cursed. He is a man who was transformed into something terrible. And he has spent centuries trying to atone." Elena squeezed her sister's hands. "I know this is difficult to understand. I know it sounds like madness, but I have seen him, Elena, the real him, beneath the curse, and I love him." Tears streamed down Elena's face. "You cannot love a vampire. It is not possible." "Why not? Does he not feel? Does he not suffer? Does he not long for redemption and peace? He is more human than many mortals I have known. He will kill you eventually. The hunger will overcome him. He has not fed on a human in 50 years. He has more control than you can imagine. And tomorrow night I will bind myself to the castle through magic that will protect both me and him. We will find a way to exist together, and perhaps with time, we will find a way to break his curse entirely." Elena pulled her hands away, standing abruptly. "I cannot accept this. I cannot lose you to that place." "You are not losing me," Elena said gently. "I will still be your sister. I will still love you. But I cannot live the life you want for me, Elena. I cannot pretend that returning to this village and marrying and growing old is what I want. I want more. I want something that matters. And he matters to you. More than anything." Elena was silent for a long time, her face a battlefield of emotions. Finally, she said, "If this is truly what you want, if you are certain, then I will not try to stop you. But please, Elena, please be careful. Please do not let him destroy you." "I will not," Elena promised. She stood and embraced her sister one more time. "Live well, Elena. Be happy. Find love of your own, the kind that fills your heart rather than breaking it. And know that wherever I am, Whatever I become, I will always be your sister." They held each other and cried, both knowing that this was a farewell of sorts. When Elena finally pulled away and left the cottage, she did not look back. If she did, she knew her resolve would crumble. Count Dracula was waiting where she had left him, standing in the moonlight like a figure carved from shadow. She took his hand without a word, and together they climbed back up the mountain to the castle. Neither spoke, but the silence was comfortable, companionable. When they reached the castle, Count Dracula led her to the chapel. He had been working while she was gone, she realized. The inverted cross had been removed from the altar, and in its place was a circle drawn in salt. Candles stood at 5 points around the circle, unlit. On the altar itself lay a silver knife, a chalice, and bundles of herbs she recognized from the books they had studied. "Tomorrow night," he said quietly. "Are you still certain?" Elena looked at the preparations, at the evidence of his care and attention to detail, at the hope he was trying so hard to hide. "I am certain," she said. "I have never been more certain of anything." He nodded slowly. "Then rest tonight. Eat well. Prepare yourself. The ritual will be demanding, both physically and spiritually. You will need your strength. Will you stay with me tonight? As you did before?" A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "If you wish it." They returned to her room, and Elena changed into her nightgown, while Count Dracula waited by the fire. When she climbed into bed, he settled into the chair and watched her with those dark, fathomless eyes. "Tell me a story," Elena said sleepily. "Tell me about something beautiful you have seen in all your years." He was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then he began to speak, his voice low and melodious. "I once saw the Northern Lights," he said. "It was in the early 1600s, and I had traveled far north, seeking solitude and distance from the sins I had committed. I stood on a frozen lake under the winter sky, and the lights appeared, green and purple and blue, dancing across the stars like living things. I had seen many wonders in my existence, but that night I wept, because the beauty was so pure, so untouched by darkness, and I knew I could never be part of such purity again." "You were part of it," Elena murmured. "You witnessed it. That made you part of it." "Perhaps. Or perhaps I was merely a shadow watching light, never able to touch it." "You touch me," Elena said. "And I am light, am I not?" He was silent for a long time. Then he said, "Yes, you are. You are the light I thought I had lost forever." Elena drifted off to sleep with those words warming her heart, and in the chair by the fire, Count Dracula kept his vigil, watching over her through the long night, marveling at the miracle of her presence in his cursed existence, and praying to a god he no longer believed in that he would not fail her when the moment came. The next day passed in a haze of preparation. Elena bathed in water infused with the herbs specified in the ritual. She dressed in white, as the covenant had always demanded, but this time she chose the gown herself, selecting the simplest and most elegant. She ate sparingly, her stomach too nervous to accept much food. Count Dracula spent the day in the chapel, preparing everything with meticulous precision. The circle was redrawn multiple times until it was perfect. The candles were blessed with words so old they predated Christianity. The knife was sharpened and sanctified. As darkness fell and the new moon rose, hidden behind clouds, Elena made her way to the chapel. Count Dracula stood at the altar, dressed all in black, looking more like a priest than a monster. When he saw her, something in his expression softened. "You are beautiful," he said simply. Elena stepped into the circle and took her place at the center. Her heart was racing, but her hands were steady. "I am ready," she said. Count Dracula began the ritual. He lit the candles one by one, speaking words of power in languages Elena did not recognize, Latin and Greek and older tongues still, words that seemed to make the very air vibrate. The candle flames burned blue, then green, then settled into a strange silver light. He took up the chalice and the knife and moved to stand before Elena. "Your blood, freely given," he said, his voice formal now, "ritualistic. Will you offer it in service of the wards, in protection of this place and all within it?" "I offer it freely," Elena said, holding out her hand. He took her hand in his, and with the knife, made a small cut across her palm. Blood welled up, red and bright, and he let it drip into the chalice. Then he bandaged her hand with strips of white cloth and added the herbs to the blood, mixing them with a silver rod until the liquid turned dark as wine. "Your vows," he said, "speak them now." Elena took a deep breath. "I, Elena Vasile, bind myself to this castle and to the one who dwells within it. I offer my protection, my companionship, and my devotion, freely and without coercion. I become guardian of these walls and keeper of the wards. By my blood and by my will, I renew the covenant. Let no evil enter here uninvited. Let no harm come to those within, and let the bond between this place and its master be sustained not by fear, but by love." The candles flared suddenly, the silver light becoming almost blinding. Count Dracula spoke his own vows, his voice ringing through the chapel. "I, Vlad Dracula, accept this bond. I swear to protect the one who has chosen to stand beside me. I swear to honor her sacrifice and to strive always toward the light she represents. By her blood and by her will, the covenant is renewed. Let these wards stand strong. Let this castle be sanctuary, and let the bond between us be one of choice and not of chains." The light became unbearable. Elena felt power rushing through her, electric and overwhelming. Her blood in the chalice began to glow, and Count Dracula took it to the 5 points of the circle, anointing each with a drop. As he completed the circuit, Elena felt something snap into place, like a door locking, like a key turning. The bond was sealed. The light faded. The candles returned to normal flames. Elena swayed on her feet, suddenly exhausted, and Count Dracula was there instantly, catching her before she fell. He lifted her easily and carried her from the chapel, through the corridors, back to her room. He laid her gently on the bed and sat beside her, taking her bandaged hand in his. "It is done," he said softly. "You are bound to this place now. To me." Elena smiled weakly. "I can feel it. The castle, the wards, even you. It is like a thread connecting us. Does it hurt?" "No. It feels right." He raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, careful of the wound. "Thank you," he whispered. "For this, for everything, for choosing me when you could have chosen so much more." "I chose exactly what I wanted," Elena said, "and I would choose it again." They sat together in the quiet, feeling the new bond between them settle and strengthen. Outside, the creatures in the forest felt the change. The wards flared bright and impenetrable, stronger than they had been in decades. The castle was protected once more, and at its heart, a new kind of covenant had been born. One built not on sacrifice and fear, but on choice and love. It was a beginning, fragile and uncertain, but real. And in the darkness of the Gothic castle, two beings who should never have found each other discovered something neither had dared to hope for: the possibility of redemption, the chance at happiness, the promise of tomorrow. The weeks that followed the ritual brought a peace to the castle that Count Dracula had not known in centuries. The wards held strong, pulsing with renewed power, keeping the creatures at bay. Elena could feel them, a constant presence at the edge of her awareness, a warm protective barrier that separated the castle from the darkness beyond. She could also feel Count Dracula himself, a thread of connection that let her sense his presence, even when they were in different parts of the vast structure. They fell into a rhythm that was almost domestic. Elena would wake each morning and spend her time reading, playing the harpsichord, or walking the castle grounds within the safety of the wards. Count Dracula would join her in the evenings, and they would talk for hours about everything and nothing. He told her stories of the centuries he had lived through, the rise and fall of empires, the changing of the world. She told him about her simple life in the village, the small joys and sorrows that had shaped her. Slowly, carefully, they learned each other. But beneath the peace, Elena sensed something changing in Count Dracula. He grew quieter as the days passed, more withdrawn. She would catch him staring at her with an expression of such longing and sorrow that it made her chest ache. When she asked him what was wrong, he would smile and claim it was nothing, but she knew better. The bond between them carried emotion as well as awareness, and she could feel the growing turmoil within him. It was on the night of the winter solstice, the longest night of the year, that everything came to a head. Elena found Count Dracula in the treasury, standing before the portrait of his mortal self. He did not turn when she entered, simply continued to stare at the painted face of the man he had been. "I have been thinking about mortality," he said quietly, "about what it means to be human. I had forgotten, over the centuries. It had become abstract, a distant memory. But watching you these past weeks, seeing you live and breathe and feel, it has all come rushing back." Elena moved to stand beside him. "Is that a bad thing? I do not know." He finally looked at her, and she saw the depth of his internal struggle. "When I was mortal, I knew my time was limited. Every moment had weight, because I understood it would end. I loved fiercely because I knew I would not love forever. I fought with everything I had because I knew death was waiting. But now, with eternity stretching before me, everything has lost its meaning. Days blur into years, years into decades. Nothing matters, because nothing ends." "I matter," Elena said softly. "Do I not? You matter more than anything. That is the problem." He turned to face her fully. "Elena, you are bound to this castle now. But you are still mortal. You will age. In 10 years you will begin to show the signs. In 20 you will be middle-aged. In 40, if you live that long, you will be an old woman. And I will remain exactly as I am, unchanging, watching you wither and die while I continue on." "Then turn me," Elena said, not for the first time. "Make me like you so we can have eternity together." "No." His voice was firm. "I will not condemn you to this existence. I will not take your mortality from you, no matter how much I might wish to keep you forever." "Then what do you want?" He was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I want to be mortal again. I want to feel the sun on my face without burning. I want to taste food and feel warmth and know that my time is limited and precious. I want to grow old with you and die a natural death and face whatever judgment awaits rather than continuing this cursed existence." Elena felt her breath catch. "Is that possible?" "I do not know. I have searched for a cure for centuries and found nothing. But perhaps I was searching for the wrong thing. Perhaps what I need is not a cure but a sacrifice. What kind of sacrifice?" He moved to the altar where his wife's belongings lay. "When Elisabetta turned me, she used her own blood to bind me to darkness. The curse is in my blood now, woven into every part of my being. To undo it would require something equally powerful, a sacrifice of immense magnitude. Your death," Elena said, understanding dawning. "Not death, mortality. If I could somehow burn away the curse, reduce myself to what I was before, I would become human again. But the process would likely kill me. The human body I would return to is over 500 years past its natural end. It would crumble to dust within moments." "Unless it did not," Elena said slowly. "Unless the magic that turns you mortal also gives you the lifespan you should have had. A second chance at the life that was stolen from you." Count Dracula shook his head. "That is hoping for too much. Magic does not work that way. It takes, it costs, it demands payment. The payment for my mortality would be my existence, but you do not know that for certain. Have you found references to such a transformation? Is there precedent?" He hesitated. "There are stories, legends of vampires who found redemption and returned to humanity. But they are just that, stories. I have never met anyone who has succeeded." "Then let us try," Elena said. "Let us find out if the stories are true." He stared at her. "You would risk losing me entirely for the chance that I might become mortal. I would risk anything to give you the peace you deserve." Elena took his cold hands in hers. "You have suffered for centuries. You have carried guilt and darkness and isolation beyond what any being should endure. If there is even the smallest chance that you could be free of this curse, we must take it. And if I die, if I crumble to nothing?" "Then you die free," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You die human with your soul intact, able to face God without the weight of immortality holding you back. Is that not worth the risk?" Count Dracula pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "You are asking me to leave you. I am asking you to save yourself." Elena wrapped her arms around him. "I love you enough to let you go if that is what it takes." He held her for a long time, neither of them speaking. Finally, he said, "If we are to do this, we must be certain. We must research every text, follow every lead. We must understand exactly what is required and what the consequences will be." "Then we research," Elena said. "We learn everything we can, and when we are ready, we make the attempt." They spent the next month buried in study even more intense than before. Count Dracula brought forth books he had not opened in decades, scrolls written by alchemists and sorcerers who had sought to understand the nature of vampirism. They read accounts of those who had tried to reverse the curse and failed, looking for patterns in the failures. They studied the magic of transformation, of sacrifice, of blood and binding. Slowly, a picture emerged. The curse could potentially be undone through a ritual of purification, one that would require Count Dracula to confront every life he had taken, every sin he had committed, and accept full responsibility without deflection or justification. He would need to be judged not by God or man, but by his own conscience. If he could face the weight of his crimes and still believe himself worthy of redemption, the curse might break. The catch, as always, was the cost. Such a ritual would consume the vampire entirely, burning away the supernatural aspects and leaving only what remained of the original human. If the human was too damaged, too far removed from life, it would simply cease to exist. "I have killed hundreds," Count Dracula said quietly as they reviewed their findings. "Perhaps thousands over the centuries. How can I face all of that and still believe I deserve to live?" "Because you have also spent centuries trying to atone," Elena said. "Because you have shown mercy when you could have shown cruelty. Because you have protected when you could have destroyed. The weight of your sins is heavy, but the weight of your remorse is equally great. Is remorse enough? It has to be. Otherwise, what hope is there for any of us?" They set the date for the ritual. The spring equinox, when light and darkness were in perfect balance. It seemed fitting, symbolic. Count Dracula spent the weeks leading up to it in quiet preparation. He spoke with his servants, releasing them from their bonds and giving them the choice to remain or to leave. Most chose to stay, having nowhere else to go, but a few ventured out into the world, embracing whatever fate awaited them. He arranged his affairs, such as they were, leaving instructions for Elena should the worst happen. Elena spent her time trying not to think about the possibility of losing him. She had bound herself to this castle, to him, and if he died, she would feel it through the bond. She would know the moment his existence ended. The thought terrified her, but she pushed the fear aside. This was his choice, his right. She would support him, no matter what came. The night before the ritual, they sat together in Elena's room, the fire burning low. Count Dracula held her hand, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "I need you to promise me something," he said. "Anything. If I die tomorrow, if the ritual fails and I crumble to dust, you must leave this place. Go back to the village, to your sister. Live your life. Find happiness." Elena shook her head. "I cannot promise that. Elena, if you die, I will feel it through the bond. It will break me, but I will survive because I must. I will tend to the castle in your memory. I will keep the wards strong, and perhaps in time I will find a way to live with the loss. But I will not pretend I can simply return to the life I left behind." He cupped her face in his hands. "You deserve so much more than to be the guardian of a dead man's castle." "I deserve to choose my own path," Elena replied. "And I choose this. I choose you, living or dead. I choose to honor what we have built here." "You are going to break my heart," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Then let it break knowing you were loved," Elena said. "Let it break knowing someone saw you for who you truly are and loved you anyway." He kissed her then, gently and carefully, as if she were made of glass. It was the first time he had allowed himself such intimacy, and Elena felt the restraint in it, the fear that he might harm her. She kissed him back, pouring all her love and hope and desperation into the gesture. When they finally pulled apart, both were trembling. "Whatever happens tomorrow," Count Dracula said, "know that you have given me something I thought lost forever. You have given me hope. You have given me a reason to believe redemption is possible. That alone is worth any price." They held each other through the long night, neither sleeping, simply existing together in the quiet. When dawn began to break, Count Dracula rose and prepared himself. He dressed simply, in the white shirt and dark trousers of a man rather than the elaborate clothing of a prince. He wanted to face this as he was, stripped of pretense and title. The ritual would take place at noon, when the sun was at its strongest. It was dangerous, placing Count Dracula in sunlight, but necessary. The purification required light, required confronting the very thing that had been denied him for centuries. Elena had prepared the courtyard, creating a circle of salt and blessed herbs. At the center was a chair, and beside it a table with a chalice filled with holy water, a cross blessed by Father Mihail himself, and the silver knife from the previous ritual. As noon approached, Elena led Count Dracula to the courtyard. His face was pale, but resolute. When the sun touched his skin, he flinched but did not burn. The renewed wards provided some protection, allowing him these brief moments in daylight without being consumed. But that protection would not last once the ritual began. Count Dracula took his place in the circle, sitting in the chair. Elena stood at the edge, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might burst. He looked at her one last time, his expression full of love and gratitude and acceptance. Then he closed his eyes and began to speak. He spoke of every life he had taken. He named them when he could, described them when he could not. Soldiers and peasants, nobles and beggars, the guilty and the innocent. He spoke of the women he had turned, the creatures he had created, the villages he had terrorized. He did not excuse or justify. He simply acknowledged, accepting full responsibility for each and every sin. The sun grew brighter, focused somehow on the circle. Elena watched in horror as Count Dracula's skin began to smoke. He gritted his teeth against the pain, but continued speaking, his voice growing hoarse. She wanted to rush forward to pull him from the circle, but she knew she could not interfere. This was his trial, and he had to face it alone. Hours passed. The sun reached its zenith and began to descend. Count Dracula's confession continued, an endless recitation of guilt and sorrow. His skin was burned now, blackened in places, and Elena could smell the acrid scent of burning flesh. Tears streamed down her face, but she remained silent, bearing witness to his suffering. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Count Dracula spoke his last words. "I have committed terrible sins," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I have caused immeasurable suffering. I have been a monster in truth. But I am also a man who has spent centuries seeking redemption. I am a man who has known love, who has protected the innocent when I could, who has fought against his own nature every night of his cursed existence. If there is any mercy in this universe, if there is any possibility of forgiveness, I ask for it now. Not because I deserve it, but because I desperately wish to be more than the sum of my crimes." The sun flared one final time, impossibly bright. Elena cried out and shielded her eyes. When she could see again, Count Dracula was engulfed in flames, white and pure, burning away the darkness. She heard him scream, a sound of agony so profound it tore at her soul. The bond between them burned as well, searing her from the inside, and she collapsed to her knees. The flames consumed him entirely. Elena watched through tears as the figure in the chair was reduced to nothing, burned away until not even ash remained. The bond went silent, empty. He was gone. Elena knelt at the edge of the circle, her whole body shaking with sobs. She had lost him. The ritual had failed or succeeded too well, burning away everything until nothing remained. The castle felt hollow now, empty of his presence. She was alone. Then she heard it. A sound so faint she thought she imagined it. A cough, a breath. Elena's head snapped up, her eyes searching the circle frantically. There in the chair, something was forming. Not from ash, but from light, as if the sun itself was giving shape to matter. The form grew more solid, more defined, until finally a man sat where the vampire had been. He was mortal. Elena could see it immediately. His skin was tan, warmed by the sun rather than burned. His chest rose and fell with real breath, and his eyes, when they opened, were no longer the dark voids of a vampire but a warm brown, fully human and fully alive. Count Dracula looked down at his hands in wonder. He flexed his fingers, felt the warmth of blood moving through his veins, the beat of a heart in his chest. He looked up at the sun, still visible in the western sky, and began to laugh. It was a sound of pure joy, of disbelief, of salvation. "Elena," he said, his voice different now, richer and more vibrant. "Elena, it worked. I am human. I am alive." Elena tried to stand, but found her legs would not support her. Count Dracula, no longer a count and no longer cursed, rose from the chair and stumbled toward her. He fell to his knees beside her and pulled her into his arms. They held each other and wept, not from sorrow but from overwhelming relief and joy. When they could finally speak, Elena pulled back to look at him. "Are you truly free? The curse is broken?" He nodded. "I can feel it. The hunger is gone. The cold is gone. I am simply a man, as I was meant to be." He touched her face with wonder. "And I can feel your warmth. True warmth, not just the absence of cold. You are real and alive, and I am real and alive, and we have been given a miracle." "What will you do now?" Elena asked. He smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger, lighter. "I will live," he said simply. "For the first time in 5 centuries, I will truly live. With you, if you will have me." "Always," Elena said. "For as long as we both shall live." They remained in the castle, but it was a different place now. The servants, freed from their bonds, chose to stay and serve of their own will, becoming caretakers rather than thralls. The village, hearing of the Count's transformation, sent emissaries bearing gifts and gratitude. The creatures in the forest, sensing the change in power, retreated deeper into the wilderness, no longer drawn by the presence of their dark master. Elena and the man who had been Count Dracula, who chose to simply be called Vlad now, began to build a life together. He learned to be human again, slowly, and with many stumbles. Food tasted strange to him at first, overwhelming after so long without flavor. Sleep was difficult, his body unaccustomed to the rhythm of rest and waking. But Elena was patient, guiding him through each step, helping him rediscover the small joys of mortality. They married in the spring, in the chapel where the cross now stood upright once more. Father Mihail performed the ceremony, his old hands shaking as he blessed the union. Irina attended, her face still showing doubt, but also hope. She saw how her sister looked at Vlad, saw how he looked back, and she understood that this was love in its truest form, transformative and redemptive and powerful beyond measure. Years passed. Elena and Vlad grew older together, their hair turning grey, their faces gaining lines. They had children, 2 daughters who filled the castle with laughter and light. The girls grew up hearing stories of their father's past, the centuries he had endured, the curse he had broken. They understood that redemption was possible for anyone, no matter how far they had fallen, as long as they were willing to face their sins and strive to be better. The castle itself changed. No longer a place of darkness and dread, it became a sanctuary. Travelers were welcomed, given shelter and food. The library was open to scholars who came from distant lands to study the ancient texts. The music room echoed with the sounds of harpsichord and violin, the melancholy replaced with joy. And through it all, Elena and Vlad remained devoted to each other. They would walk the battlements in the evening, looking out over the mountains, marveling at the life they had built from the ruins of his curse. He would tell her he loved her every day, never taking for granted the miracle of being able to say it as a man rather than a monster. She would hold his hand and feel the warmth of it, the pulse of life, and know that her sacrifice had been worth every moment. On the day Vlad turned 70, by the count of his mortal years, he stood with Elena in the courtyard where the ritual had taken place. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. He looked at his wife, her hair white now, but her eyes as bright as ever, and he said, "I have lived more truly in these 30 years than in the 5 centuries that came before." "That is because you chose to live," Elena replied. "You chose redemption over damnation, hope over despair, love over isolation." "I chose you," he corrected, "and you chose me." That made all the difference. They remained in the courtyard until the stars emerged, bright and cold against the velvet sky. The castle stood strong around them, its wards still holding, powered now not by sacrifice but by the love that dwelt within its walls. The creatures of darkness remained in the wilderness, unable to approach. The village thrived, no longer living in fear. In time, Vlad would pass from this world as all mortals do, but when he did, it would be in Elena's arms, his children at his bedside, having lived a full and meaningful life. He would face whatever judgment awaited with peace, knowing that he had found redemption, that he had been loved, that he had made amends as best he could. And Elena, when her own time came, would join him, her soul unbound from the castle at last. The daughters they had raised would take up the stewardship, maintaining the sanctuary their parents had created, ensuring that the castle remained a place of light rather than darkness. The story of the vampire who became human would be told for generations, passed down as a tale of hope and redemption. People would speak of the maiden who saw past the monster to the man within, who offered love when all the world offered was fear. They would speak of the impossible transformation, of the power of choice and sacrifice and unwavering faith in the possibility of change. But for Elena and Vlad, it was simply their story, the story of two beings who found each other in the darkest of circumstances and refused to let darkness win. The story of love that transcended the boundaries of life and death, mortal and immortal, human and monster. The story of redemption earned through suffering and sacrifice, and the beautiful, terrible, sacred truth that no one is beyond saving if they are willing to face themselves and choose to be better. As the stars wheeled overhead and the castle stood sentinel against the night, Elena and Vlad walked hand in hand back inside, to the warmth and light waiting for them. Behind them the wards hummed with power, protecting not from evil without, but preserving the sanctuary within. A place where love had triumphed over damnation, where hope had defeated despair, where two souls had found peace in each other's arms. And that, in the end, was everything. The story of Count Dracula had ended. The story of Vlad and Elena would continue until their natural ends, filled with the simple joys and sorrows of mortal existence. They had been given the greatest gift of all, the gift that Vlad had sacrificed his immortality to obtain. They had been given life, true life with all its beauty and pain, its brevity and meaning, and they would live it together every precious day until the sun set on them for the final time and they stepped together into whatever lay beyond. Their hands joined, their love eternal even as their bodies returned to dust. In a world of darkness and monsters they had found light. In a castle built on sacrifice and sorrow they had built happiness, and in each other they had found home. The end.